Welcome back for part 3 of Debunking Elon Musk 2022. And this segment wraps up the interview Chris Anderson conducted with Musk at the Austin factory prior to the live presentation in Vancouver, BC, and that segment is going to be our part 4. This episode will review the segment of the interview dealing specifically with the claims Musk makes about Starship and the colonization of Mars. By now, we have all heard Musk's glorious plans to preserve the light of consciousness by making us a multiplanetary species. Wherever he stole that line from, he certainly gets a lot of mileage out of it, so we'll skip over all that repetition. And we really hope the people who defend Musk online are present and paying attention, because a large number of the things they say Musk has never claimed are claimed again in this segment. So here we go, starting when Anderson segued into SpaceX and Starship using a most ridiculous premise.
If AI were to take down Earth, we need a plan B. We spoke last time about reusability, and you had just demonstrated that spectacularly for the first time. Since then, you've gone on to build this monster rocket, Starship. Yes. Tell us about Starship.
What Anderson should have asked Musk was to tell us something new about Starship. Generally speaking, Musk is a broken record when it comes to these claims about what his ship is and what it will do. You can see what we mean by comparing clips to the 2019 and the 2022 Starship presentations.
The holy grail is full and rapid reusability.
A rapidly reusable orbital rocket. This is basically the holy grail of space.
The holy grail breakthrough that's needed is a rapid and completely reusable rocket system.
Rapidly reusable orbital rocket. Rapidly reusable orbital rocket. Rapidly reusable orbital rocket. Rapidly reusable orbital rocket.
With Starship, we will be recovering the entire thing. Recovering it in such a way that it can be immediately reflown. Whereas with Falcon 9, we still need to do some amount of refurbishment. But with Starship, the design goal is immediate reflight. You just refill propellants and go again.
As we went through, after Musk's February 10th presentation at Boca Chica, Musk is telling people that Starship will land, get refueled, and take off again with absolutely no refurbishment. Just refill it and take off again. In this case, Musk is specifically talking about Starship, the tanker or human-rated craft, not the super heavy booster, and that makes this claim even more ridiculous. We do not, for 1 second, believe that this vehicle will ever be able to take off, return to the pad, and go again as soon as the prop tanks are full. We went through all of this in our episode Starship Update 2022, along with the time we expect it would take just to refill the ship with propellant. However, if there is a single accredited rocket engineer that would like to risk their professional reputation defending this insane claim made by Musk, by all means get in touch and we'll have a nice long chat about it. Moving on to the next claim.
And the main design is to take 100 plus people at a time, plus a bunch of things that they need, to Mars.
Let's stop it right there. Anderson starts off by saying the design is meant to carry 100 people at a time to Mars. Musk nods and agrees. So now, anytime a fanboy tells you Musk never said it was meant to carry 100 people, you now have the most recent citation directly from Musk, and it will be repeated by him a couple of times. Now, we've gone through this before in our earliest episodes, how trying to cram 100 people in one of these rockets along with everything they will need to bring with them is absolutely impossible. We started explaining this in our very first episode 2 years ago. Then Anderson asks about updated timelines to get to Mars.
What is your latest timeline? 1, for the first time a Starship goes to Mars, presumably without people but just equipment. 2, with people. 3, okay, 100 people at a time, let's go.
Anderson asked Musk about updated timelines for when Starship will make good on these 3 promises. First cargo flight, first crewed flight, and the first colony flight. A completely reasonable line of questioning considering this was the timeline Musk was peddling in 2019 for Starship milestones. Uncrewed moon mission last year, 2021. Mars cargo mission this year, 2022. Crewed dear moon mission early next year, 2023. And first feet on Mars in 2024. In 2019, Musk raised $1 billion in venture capital rounds based on these forecasts. Series J in January, K in May, and L in June 2019 gave Musk another $1.1 billion to burn, and yet Starship has not made good on any of these promises. So Anderson asked Musk about these timelines, and what does Musk do? Well, first, as he's done before, he crosses his arms defensively. Then, as before, he doesn't actually answer the question. Textbook avoidance. We've sped it up to get through the long-winded non-answer quicker, but you can see how he takes a completely unrelated tangent away from any question he does not want to answer.
The cost thing into perspective, the expected cost of Starship putting 100 tons into orbit is significantly less than what it did cost to put our tiny Falcon 1 rocket into orbit. Just as the cost of flying a 747 around the world is less than the cost of a small airplane. A small airplane that was thrown away. It's really pretty mind-boggling that the giant thing costs way less than the small thing. It doesn't use exotic propellants or things that are difficult to obtain on Mars. It uses methane as fuel, and Mars has a CO2 atmosphere and has water ice, which is CO2 plus H2O, so you can make CH4, methane, and O2 oxygen.
Right. To Anderson's credit, he ignores having the question being ignored, then jumps on what Musk just mentioned, that is, making fuel on Mars. Musk has declared he will use carbon dioxide, CO2, and water, H2O, to create methane, CH4, and liquid oxygen, LOX or O2. Musk would have you believe that is the entire equation, but if he is using the Sabatier process, as he's mentioned before, the reaction looks more like this and requires a nickel catalyst. The process also requires a reaction chamber heated to between 300 and 400 degrees Celsius with an operating pressure of 30 bar, both of which will require a lot of energy to facilitate. To date, to our knowledge, Musk does not have a production facility on Earth, proving SpaceX has this ability to make fuel out of thin air even on our home planet. So far, all the propellants used at Boca Chica are still being trucked in by diesel tractor trailers running through protected nature preserves. It's our belief that the reason why he sponsored the $100 million Carbon Capture X Prize was so that other people could figure out the beginning process for this for him. But even after capturing the carbon dioxide, he still needs the tech to turn it into fuel.
Presumably one of the first tasks on Mars will be to create a fuel plant that can create the fuel for the return trip.
It's mostly going to be an oxygen plant. Well, it's 78% oxygen, 22% fuel. The fuel is a simple fuel that is easy to create on Mars and many other parts of the solar system.
Now that the topic has been brought up, this is a good chance for us to mention that our next Mars episode we're going to publish is on this very topic. And we'll leave it there for the time being. What we aren't going to put off is the claim Musk makes that methane is a simple fuel that can be easily made in many other parts of the solar system. Here are the planets of our solar system along with their atmospheric makeups and pressures relative to Earth. Compared to Earth, on Mars there is a much thinner atmosphere and a higher concentration in that thinner atmosphere of carbon dioxide to harvest. Venus also reportedly has a higher concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than Earth does, with a surface pressure 90 times that on Earth and a surface temperature that rivals the top end of your kitchen oven. The atmospheric pressure on the surface is about the same as being 900 meters submerged under the sea when the typical scuba diver maxes out at 40 meters. 900 meters depth exceeds the crush depth, or more properly, collapse depth, for most modern naval submarines.
You don't want to go there. Venus is hell, almost literally.
So that takes care of Mars and Venus, but none of the other planets have atmospheric carbon dioxide of note. Not even Mercury, which doesn't officially even have an atmosphere. Moving to the gas and ice giants, their atmospheres are mainly hydrogen and helium. Jupiter and Saturn have no mention of carbon dioxide in their atmosphere. Uranus and Neptune don't have carbon dioxide but appear to have single-digit concentrations of methane in their makeup. Same with Pluto and Saturn's largest moon Titan, although Titan appears to have a sea of liquid methane on its surface, which, if true, could give one other possibility to fill the tanks, orbiting the Sun at an average distance of 1.48 billion kilometers. Of the other moons in the solar system that have atmospheres, Callisto orbiting Jupiter has a carbon dioxide atmosphere, but the atmospheric pressure is 1/10 billionth as thick as the air on Earth, and Triton orbiting Neptune has an atmosphere consisting primarily of nitrogen with trace amounts of methane. Atmospheric pressure on Triton is 100,000th of Earth's 1013 millibars, making the concentration of gases in those atmospheres insignificant. So it's fair to say that methane is not as easy to create anywhere in the solar system as Musk just claimed. Which leads into the next claim.
It's a generalized method of transport to anywhere in the solar system, because at the point at which you have a propellant depot on Mars, you can then travel to the asteroid belt and to the moons of Jupiter and then to Saturn and ultimately anywhere in the solar system.
Again, just a throwaway statement that people shouldn't question because Musk said it, right? This ship can go anywhere in the solar system, just like he says. Well, here's the thing. Many of the solar system diagrams you'll find online look something like this because they can't reproduce the scale, and it lends belief to the off-the-cuff statements about traveling between planets. But we need to get real about this. Earth orbits the Sun at about 150 million kilometers average distance. Mars orbits at an average 228 million kilometers, so the orbits of the two planets are separated by 78 million kilometers at their closest point. In 2020, it took Perseverance 7 months to perform that transit, and the same year it took Tianwen-1 9 months. We've been using 6 months for a transit time for more recent episodes on Starship, despite the NASA statement that this voyage typically takes 9 months. Of course, SpaceX fanboys cry out in unison, Musk said Starship can do it in 3 months or less, to which our reply is, prove it. Prove this rusty test article can beat the time of every other vessel sent towards Mars. Current record holder is Mariner 7. It crossed the void in 128 days. If you need help with that math, that is over 4 months. And Mariner 7 was a small probe similar in appearance to a ceiling fan with a launch mass of 411.8 kilograms. Mariner 7 came within 3,500 kilometers of Mars as a flyby with no ability or intention of landing. As it is, so far as we're concerned, we're cutting Musk a huge break using only 6 months as a transit time for this thing. Once you pass Mars, you get into the asteroid field that extends all the way to Jupiter's orbit at 778 million kilometers, 550 million kilometers further away from Earth than Mars is. It took Juno 5 years to reach Jupiter, Galileo did it in 6, but Starship, if it takes us 6 months to transfer orbits from Earth to Mars, it would take 8 times as long, 4 years, to get from Earth to Jupiter if the planets are at their closest approach. Next up is Saturn, almost twice as far from the Sun as Jupiter at 1.434 billion kilometers. Cassini arrived at Saturn in 6 years and 9 months, but at the same velocity as an Earth to Mars transit in a Starship, we're talking over 8 years. That being said, Cassini had to use gravity assist slingshots from the Earth, Venus, and Jupiter to make the journey, so it was not exactly a straight line. Moving even further away from the Sun, it's double the distance again to get to Uranus at 2.873 billion kilometers. Uranus has been visited once by Voyager 2 in 1986, taking 9.5 years to intercept and fly by the planet. 18 years that would take in a Starship. Neptune was also visited one single time, again by Voyager 2, 4.5 billion kilometers from the Sun. It took Voyager 2 12 years for that intercept. It would take Starship 28 years. And Pluto is almost 6 billion kilometers from the Sun, taking 247.7 years to complete a single orbit. Hashtag Team Pluto. It took the New Horizons probe 9.5 years to reach Pluto, moving at 58,580 kilometers per hour. It took Voyager 1 12.5 years to cover that distance. Using the Mars transfer orbit time of 6 months, we can extrapolate a transit time of about 37.5 years. Actual time will be somewhere in between. Now, the probes we're talking about here are little more than dishes with antennae attached, generally between 1 and 2 tons of launch mass. The heaviest probe sent to another planet is Cassini, weighing under 6 tons to study Saturn. That was about 60% heavier than Juno at 3.6 tons. So when people think Starship is going to match those velocities as a 100-ton machine carrying 100 tons of payload plus propellant, they are not thinking straight. And even if they could match those speeds, those journeys are still measured in years and decades. Again, it's fair to say traipsing through the solar system in Starship, as Musk claims, is not going to happen, even with a fuel depot on Mars.
Before it can do any of that, it's got to demonstrate it can get into orbit. What's your latest advice on the timeline for that?
We'll be integrating the engines into the booster for the first orbital flight starting in about a week or 2. Launch complex itself is ready to go. Assuming we get regulatory approval, I think we could have an orbital launch attempt within a few months.
Let's hit the highlights here. Musk said they are integrating the engines with the booster in about a week or so, which they seem to be doing. But on February 10th, Musk told his fans they don't have the engines worked out. They abandoned Raptor version 1, and Raptor version 2 continued to melt the combustion chamber.
The only remaining issue that we're aware of is melting the chamber. So that thing really wants to melt, you know. It's looking positive, but that's the remaining issue is melting the chamber.
The chances that they have worked out that entire system and put it through the necessary testing would be next to zero. In fact, at the McGregor testing facilities, Raptor 2s continue to destroy themselves on the test stand. So Raptor 2 is definitely far from being a reliable engine system 9 years after development of the full-flow methane engine began, which may be why the head of Raptor development quit last fall. Will Heltsley, VP of Propulsion, quit a week after Lee Rosen, president of Mission and Launch Operations, left, and he took Ricky Lim, his right-hand man, with him as the talent meat grinder at SpaceX continues to churn. Next, Musk says the launch complex is ready to go. Presumably, he's referring to the giant launch and catch tower for which Musk never received permission to build and is part of an FAA DPEA investigation which is now many months overdue and on May 31st was delayed again to June 13th. The FAA still has not stated whether or not they will demand that tower be torn down. Which goes to the regulatory approval Musk is talking about, and Musk loves to blame the regulators. Presently, the FAA is not the only federal agency overseeing the Boca Chica application process, and the Army Corps of Engineers has shelved SpaceX's application for the site because SpaceX has refused to comply with instructions to provide mitigation measure proposals regarding the protected preserves in the immediate vicinity of the launch site, which SpaceX intends to backfill. Other government organizations that have also expressed major concerns over this site include the Department of the Interior, the National Park Service, and the Fish and Wildlife Service jointly and severally. They are all copied on this letter. Boca Chica as an orbital launch site for Starship is far from being a done deal. So when Musk says he thinks this will happen within a few months, even in a best case scenario, he is lying to everyone, possibly including himself. So not only is he being dishonest here, the next segment demonstrates his complete disregard for proper testing and safety procedure.
For new technology like this, presumably there is real risk on those early attempts.
100%. Excitement is guaranteed. Success is not guaranteed, but excitement certainly is.
By excitement, Musk means an explosion. And an explosion at Starbase will be devastating to the local protected wildlife in that area. If Musk can't guarantee a strong chance of success, he shouldn't be granted a launch permit, period. To use a voice of experience, Commander Chris Hadfield sums up the acceptable risk in rocket travel very well in this excerpt from his masterclass.
To fly a rocket ship, you need to be an optimist. No astronaut launches for space with their fingers crossed. That's not how we deal with risk.
Crossing your fingers and praying you don't lay waste to all of Boca Chica is not an acceptable risk strategy. Moving forward, one more time, Anderson tries to get an answer out of Musk about his timeline for getting people to Mars. And one more time, the answer given has nothing to do with the question.
You've slightly put back the expected date to put the first human on Mars till 2029.
We have built a production system for Starships. We'll be making a lot of ships and boosters.
How many are you planning to make, actually?
Well, we're currently expecting to make a booster and a ship roughly every couple months, and hopefully by the end of this year, one every month. Talking in terms of rough orders of magnitude, in order to create a self-sustaining city on Mars, we'll need something on the order of 1,000 ships.
Target is 1,000 ships. SpaceX currently tries to pump out one hollow shell for Starship every couple of months, with future aspirations of being able to build one fully fleshed out vehicle per month. At their aspirational build speed for functional craft, it would take 83 years to build 1,000 ships. The home and transfer orbit between Earth and Mars opens every 26 months for a couple of weeks. 26 months is 780 days, which means to ready 1,000 vessels for interplanetary flight, they would need to build and launch more than one fully equipped and crewed ship per day on average, and that's just for the craft eventually leaving orbit. That doesn't even account for building and launching the refilling tankers or the boosters that are required to lift both types of vehicles to orbit. There is no question that if this system ever makes it to orbit, to leave orbit, they will need to have their tanks topped up. According to Musk, every Starship heading to Mars will need 6 to 10 refilling tankers, depending on which interview you listen to. According to the GAO report from July 21, 2021, the Artemis HLS mission will require 16 launches as per this Blue Origin evidence frame. So we're going to use 10 tanker launches to put us in the middle of the field. For visualization, here's a single Starship loaded down with 100 people and their belongings, riding its super heavy booster into orbit. That ship will need 10 tankers to intercept it in orbit, and those 10 tankers will require their own super heavy boosters to get them there. So for every crewed vessel, you're looking at this many launches whether or not the vehicles are reused. Again, that's for a single ship. Musk is stating around 1,000 crewed vessels per window, so 1,000 times that many launches every 26 months. The entire concept reeks of delusion, but the next part again sinks further into the ridiculous.
This picture that you have in your mind, that there's basically a 2-year window. You were picturing that during the 2030s, every couple of years, 1,000 starships take off, each containing 100 or more people.
Yes.
I mean, that picture is just completely mind-blowing to me. That sense of this armada of humans going to...
Yeah, it'd be like Battlestar Galactica, the fleet departs.
Maybe the reason why that picture is completely mind-blowing, Chris, is because the math doesn't add up at all. In episode 3, way back in the beginning, we ran the math for the grocery bill for parking 3 ships a day in orbit for 26 months using 2,340 ships per transfer window. We used 2340 because Musk said in previous news articles he would be launching 3 crewed ships per day. For this tally, we'll stick with the 1,000 ships per window he's now talking about, so we will adjust the numbers accordingly. Launching 3 ships per day, each carrying 100 people, it will take 334 consecutive days if there are no delays, setbacks, or RUDs. On the first day, 3 ships go up, each carrying 100 people, accounting for 300 crew member days in orbit. This crew will spend 333 days orbiting Earth before departing for Mars. On the second day, another 3 crews go up, and they wait for 332 days. We now have 6 ships in orbit, totaling 600 crew days today, to add to the 300 crew days from the day before. The next day, another 3 ships, another 300 people, now totaling 1,800 crew days since the process began. By the 334th day, when the last ship joins the Armada, from front to back, these colony ships will have racked up a total of 16,783,300 crew days in orbit. Those colonists will have eaten 3 meals per crew day, and according to NASA, for astronauts aboard the ISS, they eat 1.83 pounds or 0.83 kilos of food per meal. At $10,000 per pound, about $22,000 per kilo, shipped to orbit on current transports, each of those meals cost around $18,300. Now, before anyone floods the comments with complaints about us using $10,000 per pound to get material to orbit, here's why you're going to be completely ignored. Muskrats like to think that Musk has significantly dropped the cost to orbit when delivering materials to the ISS with Falcon 9 and Dragon capsules. However, what they most often compare cargo Dragon rates to is the Space Shuttle. And this is an apples to oranges comparison, since the shuttle was a human-rated craft that also brought a multi-person crew along with the fresh supplies. Crew Dragon would be a better comparison, and SpaceX charges NASA $55 million per seat, a seat occupied by an astronaut likely weighing less than 200 pounds, around 100 kilos, which is upwards of $275,000 per pound, or about $605,000 per kilogram, so if you want to play that game, you lose. Since the NASA number is real and published by more than one provider, and the aspirational numbers for Starship are imaginary, we're sticking with the number we know, whether you like it or not. Again, if you think Musk can drop that number significantly with Starship, prove it. Taking NASA's number and applying that to the meals consumed per crew day spent in orbit waiting for the convoy to queue up, we get to a pre-departure logistics bill of $921,403,170,000 just for lifting that food into orbit, an average of $921,000 per colonist before they even leave for Mars. After they leave orbit as a collective armada, those 100,000 colonists will each eat another $55,000 worth of food per day, ringing up a daily grocery bill of $5.5 billion. And if Musk ever makes good on his promise to drop that price by an order of magnitude, it will still be $550 million worth of food per day. Which brings us to the next claim being made.
And you think that it can basically be funded by people spending maybe a couple $100,000 on a ticket? Is that price about where it has been?
What's required in order to build a self-sustaining city? People who want to go and can afford to go or get sponsorship, because I think governments will also pay for it and people can take out loans. And if moving to Mars costs $100,000, then I think almost anyone can be able to go to Mars if they want. We want to make it available to anyone who wants to go.
Musk is not dealing in reality if he thinks $100,000 per person is going to cover the tab. We already know it won't cover the cost of groceries. In fact, it won't even cover the cost of the ship. To break it down further, it won't cover the cost of the rocket engines they plan to use on the ship. Right now, we know that Raptors cost SpaceX between $2 and $2.5 million apiece. Their aspirational target per unit, so their dream number, is getting that down to $250,000 each. Starship, the upper stage, has 3 sea-level Raptors and 3 vacuum Raptors planned for, and the Super Heavy booster is said to have up to 33 Raptors powering it, for a total of 39 Raptors per combined unit. At $2 million per Raptor, you're looking at $78 million just in rocket engines. Doesn't count the rest of the ship whatsoever. Compared to the $10 million they would collect in transit fares at $100,000 apiece, you can see their math is completely screwed. Now, if they can get the cost down to $250,000 per Raptor, that is still going to be $9.75 million for the rocket engines. not leaving much in reserve for building out a human-rated craft for 100 people, nor the giant booster it requires. And if you think engines are expensive, check out the price on the space toilet. Assuming Starship installs toilets like the ones on the ISS, say 4 units to accommodate the 100 people aboard, at $23 million per unit, they're looking at damn near $100 million just for crappers, or 10 times what they would collect in transit fares at $100,000 apiece. Next up, Musk gives the sales pitch for going to Mars.
The sales pitch for going to Mars is it's
Going to be cramped, dangerous, difficult, very hard work. You might die.
okay, that's the sales pitch.
Right.
But it'll be glorious.
Word for word identical from the X-Prize interview and the February 10th presentation. But that is a far cry from how he started off pitching trips to Mars. In 2017, for his published Mars Manifesto and prior paper, Making Humans a Multiplanetary Species, he was promising zero-gravity games, lecture halls, live theater, and personal cabins for an experience like a Carnival cruise. But now it's going to be cramped, difficult, and
Some of you may die, but it's a sacrifice I am willing to make.
next up, Anderson poses this question.
Oh, so on that kind of launch rate you're talking about, over 2 decades you could get your 1 million people to Mars, essentially.
Here we go, 2 decades to get 1 million people to Mars. Let's check the numbers. Anderson asked earlier about the new time frame Musk has in mind with the following stages: equipment only, first humans, then 100 people at a time. Those stages will each have to be done a minimum 26 months apart. Here's the schedule for upcoming home and transfer orbits to Mars. We've got one coming up in August-September this year. There's no chance he's getting that sorted in time. The 2024 window will, realistically, be overshadowed by Musk needing to make good on orbital refilling and on Artemis HLS, along with fulfilling his long overdue Dear Moon contract, making 2024 to Mars unlikely. If there are no hiccups whatsoever and they're given a green light for Mars, the November 2026 window would be the equipment-proof flight. If it goes perfectly, the January 2029 window might be used for a skeleton crew to land on the planet, making February 2031 the absolute best-case scenario for getting a colony ship between planets. That leaves 2033, 35, 37, and 39, 2041, 43, 46, skipping a year, 48, and 50, landing in 2051. That would give him 10 windows to get 1,000 ships per window at 100 people per ship to Mars by 2050, landing in 2051, if absolutely nothing goes wrong between now and then. The next answer Musk gives to Anderson's question leaves the host speechless. Watch his reaction.
Whose city is it? Is it NASA's city? Is it SpaceX's city?
It's the people of Mars' city.
Apparently, judging by this answer, Musk has never heard of the United Nations Outer Space Treaty of 1967, specifically Article 2, which states, "Outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, is not subject to national appropriation by claim of sovereignty, by means of use or occupation, or by any other means." This does include citizens of the countries that approve such missions, as covered under Article 6, where states parties to the treaty shall bear international responsibility for national activities in space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, whether such activities are carried on by governmental or non-governmental entities. And as for Musk's claim of advocating for a direct democracy, Musk is kind of full of shit on this, since he has declared in the past to be the future emperor of Mars, and has made other similar statements in the, get this, Starlink terms and conditions that have made legal experts call him out in articles and on social media.
So the reason you need the 1 million people is because there has to be enough people there to do everything that you need to survive.
The critical threshold is if the ships from Earth stop coming for any reason, does the Mars city die out or not?
Now, we have made this suggestion before, we're going to do it again. Before Musk tries to build a self-sustaining city on the surface of Mars, try doing it in the Antarctic. Try doing it in the middle of the Sahara, in Iceland, in Canada, pick anywhere in Africa. In fact, try doing it absolutely anywhere on Earth. There's no such thing as a self-contained, self-sustaining city, never mind one with a population of 1 million people. Musk doesn't seem to realize cities don't feed themselves, they don't supply themselves. Most of them don't even power themselves, since large power plants are quite often removed from city limits. As of today, on Earth, there are no self-sustaining cities of 1 million people to create a model from to take to Mars or anywhere else. To create the first such model, the UAE announced they were going to create a massive domed city outside of Dubai. This $140 million, 1.9 million square foot facility was proposed to be the largest space simulation city ever built, and was intended to provide a realistic model to simulate living on the surface of Mars. It was to include laboratories for food, energy, and water, as well as agricultural testing and studies about food security. Mars Science City was proudly announced by the ruler of Dubai, Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, and Crown Prince Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan in October of 2017. They announced it again in 2018, and in 2020, and again in 2021. To date, 5 years after the first announcement, these plans have not made it past the CGI rendering phase of development, and they don't even bother changing the photo every time it's announced they're going to start building this model next year. The promise in 2021 was to break ground in 2022 and have it operational by 2024, even though they're still not quite sure where it's going to go. Sounds very familiar. But because people grew up with science fiction shows and movies that portray every planet as being a Class M planet, people think all they need to do is get there and they'll be able to work out the rest. And in space, that is just not realistic.
If the oxygenator breaks, I'm going to suffocate. If the water reclaimer breaks, I'll die of thirst. If the hab breaches, I'm just going to kind of implode. And if by some miracle none of that happens, eventually I'm going to run out of food.
Vulcan, Kronos, Vega 2. All of them nothing but rock and dust. Where does the air come from? What do they eat? What do they build with? Where's the water? In a galaxy far, far away, Tatooine was a dust bowl, Hoth was an ice cube with a handful of life forms but no greenery, and Coruscant was nothing but city. Yet everyone could breathe, walk about normally, and didn't require protective suits. At least on Naboo, they had grass, trees, and a completely believable ecosystem.
There's always a bigger fish.
Given how tortured the Earth is right now, how much we're beating each other up, should someone be trying to lead those discussions to figure out what it means for this to be the people of Mars' city?
Well, I think ultimately this will be up to the people of Mars to decide how they want to rethink society. Hopefully, the people of Mars will be more enlightened and will not fight amongst each other too much. I would advocate for more of a direct democracy, not a representative democracy, and laws that are short enough for people to understand.
Musk would advocate for a direct democracy and laws that are short enough for people to understand. In our episode Colonizing Mars Part 2, we went into how we think society would be formed on interplanetary vessels and at colony sites. You can see our take on this in that episode, but long story short, it ain't going to be up to them, and it ain't going to be a democracy.
We have
And what about other exploration through the solar system?
Europa.
Right, so there's an ocean there, right?
Yeah.
And what you really want to do is to drop a submarine into the
Yeah, I mean,
ocean.
maybe there's like some squid civilization under the cephalopod civilization under the ice of Europa. That would be pretty interesting.
I mean, Elon, if you could take a submarine to Europa and we see pictures of this thing being devoured by a squid, that would honestly be the happiest moment of my life.
This is a great example of bringing something into the conversation, pretending it has anything at all to do with Musk, then pretending it was his idea. The concept of dropping a submarine through the ice of Europa into a liquid ocean below has been around since it was first postulated in 1979, that this describes the surface of that moon. Ground-based telescopes, space telescopes, and the Galileo spacecraft have all provided some data indicating that might be the case, but nobody knows for sure, and the Galileo mission around Europa lasted from 1997 to 1999, so that data is already 23 years old. They are all but certain that Europa is one giant frozen water world. But they were also certain enough not long ago that NASA announced they had found life in the sulfuric acid clouds of Venus, so until there are boots on the ground or a sub in the water, nobody is going to know for sure how thick the ice is or how deep the water. We'll assume that NASA's assumption in this regard is accurate and that an ocean measuring between 60 to 100 kilometers in depth is covered by a sheet of ice measuring 15 to 25 kilometers thick. Of course, every time water is spotted on another world, it creates excitement that it may harbor life. And granted, the first extraterrestrial life we find is going to be one of the greatest discoveries in history. But since Europa, one of Jupiter's Jovian moons, is bathed in extreme levels of radiation, there's very little chance of humans ever visiting that moon to verify any discovery. At 5.4 sieverts, 540 rem exposure per day, that is 1,800 times the annual dose experienced by a human on Earth. Lethal levels of radiation. So when you see presentations like this one, you can rest assured every person on that ship is dead. But going back to the submarine concept, this is something NASA and their partner JPL have been working on. Their machine is called BRUI, not one of their better acronyms, which stands for Buoyant Rover for Under Ice Exploration, designed to crawl on the underside of an ice sheet and observe the water below. This is not a random thought bubble or CGI. This already exists and is being successfully tested in Alaska and the Antarctic. There are other concepts out there as well. In 2018, NASA and Cornell University College of Engineering came up with Valkyrie, a nuclear-powered capsule that would sink through the ice thanks to jets of hot water at the nose to melt the ice below. Not to be confused with NASA's 6-foot humanoid robot that started out with the same name, but has since been renamed R5. R5 was designed and built by the Johnson Space Center Engineering Directorate to compete in the 2013 DARPA Robotics Challenge trials. Wonder if that's where Musk got his idea for his sex robot. Anyway, if Chris is under the impression that Musk is going to be the one to drop a submarine under the ice of Europa, Musk had better get started because these other concepts for icy moon subs have already been around for a very long time.
Do you ever wake up with the fear that there's going to be this Hindenburg moment for SpaceX where...
We've had many Hindenburg. Well, we've never had Hindenburg moments with people,
Right.
which is very important. We've blown up quite a few rockets. There's a whole compilation online that we've put together and others put together showing rockets are hard.
Watching Musk brush off a potentially disastrous event is a little chilling, especially the ease with which he does it. As he said, SpaceX has already blown up plenty of vehicles, far more than any other space company developing orbital rockets. However, the explosions at Boca Chica so far have only involved partially filled or pretty much empty propellant tanks. Spectacular as they were to watch, these were minuscule compared to what's coming. A fully loaded Starship tearing itself up on the pad and the resulting explosion will dwarf anything we have seen before. To use the Hindenburg as a possible parallel, in 1937 the Hindenburg disaster killed the entire airship industry in a heartbeat. A Starship disaster might very well see history repeat. Now in the last part of the segment, Anderson goes full muskrat. Just listen to this unending gushing about the nonsense people believe regarding the supposed synergies between all Musk companies.
So think more about this incredible array of things that you're involved with. I keep seeing synergies, to use a horrible word, between them. The robots you're building from Tesla could possibly be pretty handy on Mars,
Sure.
Doing some of the dangerous work and so forth. I mean, maybe there's a scenario where your city on Mars doesn't need 1 million people, it needs 500,000 people and 500,000 robots. Maybe the Boring Company could play a role helping create some of the subterranean dwelling spaces that you might need.
Yeah.
It seems like a partnership between Boring Company and Tesla could offer an unbelievable deal to a city to say, we will create for you a 3D network of tunnels populated by robo-taxis that will offer fast, low-cost transport to anyone. With Starship, Gwynne Shotwell talked about by 2028, from city to city, transport on planet Earth.
The fastest way to get from one place to another, if it's a long distance, is a rocket. It's basically an ICBM.
Right, because it's an ICBM, it has to land probably offshore. Why not have a tunnel that then connects to the city
that'd be cool.
Tesla's? And Neuralink, I mean, if you're going to go to Mars, having a telepathic connection with loved ones back home, even if there's a time delay.
These are not intended to be connected, by the way. There certainly could be some synergies, yeah.
It is disturbing to watch Anderson fall so completely into Musk's delusional world where reality has no bearing. We could easily spend another hour just ripping apart the last minute of what he said. But if you think the pandering during the pre-recorded Austin interview was off the chart, you ain't seen nothing yet. The live segment from Vancouver, BC is yet to come, and that is some next level cult worship. That's coming up in part 4.